So let's start a new project in Photopea. I'm just going to choose any document size at the moment as an example. I'm going to click down to the gallery option, and if you're not sure how to access this, you just go to your window menu at the top, go to more and go to gallery, and that'll add this little picture icon here, which will bring up a free, it's like a free plugin to pixabay.com, which is a completely free image website, stock image website. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scroll down. I'm just looking for something with a bit of texture, interesting texture. That paper looks nice. I might use that. Let me just keep going. That sand, I like that sand. So what I'm going to do now is click on this and it'll add it to our document. Of course, you don't have to use this gallery. You can get images from wherever you like and you can search whatever you like, but this is just an example. So what I'm looking for here is just something with a bit of interesting texture that I'm then going to use to give an effect to some text or any other object you want. So what I'm looking for here is just something that I would maybe use to create a distressed look to some text, for example. So all these tiny little grains of sand here, they're all going to have an influence on the outline of the text in a very interesting way. So what I'm going to do now is press T for our type tool. And I've already got quite a bold font selected. It's always best to do these with slightly bolder fonts. I'm just going to type displace because that's the effect we're going to be using. So bearing in mind at this point, I'm only using it for the effect on the text itself. I'm not actually interested in using the background image in the final use, but you might want to use that as well. It depends what you're going for, but I'm just using it for the texture at the moment. So once we've got our text there, we can right click and we turn that into a smart object first. We can always go back and edit it by double clicking on the smart object, but it needs to be a smart object to do the next step, which is filter, distort, displace. Now straight away you'll see what I'm talking about here. So just let's have a look at the displace screen for the moment. So at the top it says source, and that is basically the image that you're telling it to use to take the texture from, or the displacement information from, and it's always going to apply it to the layer that you have selected. So it's got the source as that big long file name, which is the one there you can see that we've brought in from that gallery plugin. And the horizontal and vertical relate to the amount of displacement on those two sort of axes. So if I crank up the horizontal and you look at the text on the screen, let me zoom in a little bit and see if I make it more clear. If I drag the horizontal, you can see it's almost like exaggerating and biasing the texture, but only on a horizontal basis. So it's sort of stretching it out and it's applying it to more sort of particles of sand, as it were, under the image. It's applying more of those displacement sort of pixels, but only in the the horizontal. And obviously it'll do the opposite. If you go vertical, you can just get different effects. Or if you increase them both to roughly the same amount, you just get an overall larger displacement effect. And the smaller you go, the more subtle and the more subtle the effect is. So it defaults to 10, which is a pretty good starting point for most things, but you can customize to whatever you want. So once you've got this down, let's say for example here, I'll turn the background layer off to see the text, but because the text was white, so you can't see that. So we'll double click on our displace smart object there, and we're just going to change the text color to red. Click OK. And I'm going to save that smart object by pressing Ctrl or Command S, depending on if you're a PC or a Mac user, or you can go to File, Save Smart Object, and then just click on the arrow to close that. And you can see in the image now, even without the sand layer being activated, we've got that sand texture displaced and kind of applied to the outline of our text. So if you put it back on, you can see there. Now it's set the displacement on the smart object. It won't update in real time if we move this around, for example. So just bear that in mind. It's like we've used it once to set the texture, and you can alter it once it's been set by double clicking on the displace here, because we've done it as a smart filter. So you can go back and you can change the values to get a different amount of displacement after the fact, but it won't update real time. If you drag it around the image, it's not going to automatically change depending on the texture itself. You have to kind of redo the displacement if you do that. But generally speaking, I'm just using the sand for this nice distress texture, so it's going to be pretty much the same all over. And now once we've got this, there's a couple more things we can do. So we can type something else in here, we just need to go into the smart object and we can just type, let's make that a bit small so it fits in. You can adjust the type within the smart object and it will then update accordingly in the main screen. So we've still got that displacement effect applied, and we can just live change the text, although we do have to do it inside the smart object. And then we can apply things like blur to this. So if we do a Gaussian blur, now what this is going to do is obviously blur our effect, because sometimes it comes out very, very crisp and a little bit too almost like pixelated looking. So just a tiny little blur of like 0.1 in this case is just enough to make the look a bit more natural. And again, once we've done that, we can go in and edit the displace and do whatever we like. You can also change the order of smart object filters or smart filters. If we just grab it, move it under, then the blur is going to be applied before the displace. So the overall image won't look blurred because the blur's happening before the displacement stage, if that makes sense. But what it does mean is you can then get different effects to the displacement by now changing the blur amount under the displace. And see how it's like making the displacement, it is blurrier overall, but it's because it's fuzzing out the area before it then displaces it, so you get a completely different effect. So you can play around with a lot of these things and get some really interesting text effects and ideas from using all sorts of different backgrounds. So let's just try something for a minute. Let's just replace the image. I'm just going to turn this blur down. Let's see what happens if we change this image. So let's go back into our gallery here. Let's look for a different image. Maybe that one of the paper that I saw a minute ago I was going to choose instead. Okay, so let's add the paper texture. Let's bring it under here. I'm just going to zoom out a bit. Just make the texture bigger, sorry, paper texture. It only needs to be big enough to cover the text. And now what we can do is we can go back into the displace smart object here, or the smart filter, and we can now change the layer to the name of this new one. There's this other layer we've got in here, which is G07. It's obviously a very long thing. And now we've got the same thing applied with this new background text. You can see it's got quite a bit of grain on this paper, so it's picking up some of those little tiny bits, but also it's bending and distorting the text along the creases and the folds of the paper. Again, you can do it more severe, horizontally, vertically, etc., etc. So again, this comes for some really nice effects, especially if you turn off the layer you've used to texture it and then just use that in isolation, because it looks like something that will be really hard to achieve, and like, how have you come up with that? If you put it on the background, it somehow seems less impressive because it kind of follows the texture. But if you take the texture out that you've used it on and kind of use that in isolation, it gives it a really unique effect that will have people wondering exactly how you did it.